From the multimedia library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi, this is Mbogi ya MaWriters. Soyez les bienvenus. Welcome. In this edition, the focus is on children and writing for children. And the author with whom I'm going to speak has joined us on the set in Nairobi, all the way from Mandera in northern Kenya. She is the author, first of all, of Arawelo and a second book entitled A Boy Named Salah. Welcome to Mbogi ya MaWriters, Sahara Abdi.
Thank you, Mwalimu.
Right. First of all, nice that you've made it all this way. I think you're the furthest traveling guest we've had on the show so far. Thank you for coming. Let's go straight into it. I'd like to know, a two-in-one question, who for you are children and why did you decide to write for them?
I write for children between the ages of 8 to 12 years. I made that my choice of focus because of the target audience I have, who are children from northern Kenya. Why did I choose to write for children? I chose to write for children because there's something about a child and books when they're first introduced to a book. I think you may forget perhaps the pictures you see in a children's storybook or the wordings, but you somehow never forget the feeling you get when about the first book you read or perhaps about the first interaction you had with a book. And so for me, my focus was to give the Northern Kenyan children that wow feeling, that feeling of picking a book and seeing their name or a picture that represents them so that they feel that books are things that belong to them too.
Yes, well, a huge responsibility to have taken on. I noted with some intrigue and interest the dedication that you gave to Arawelo. Arawelo is a girl's name, so you've chosen the girl child, gender sensitivity to the girl. She's the heroine of the story. But in the dedication you say, for the children of the nomads who don't make it to the primetime news, the children who walk for kilometers to quench their thirst for education, for the girls in hijab, for the girls traveling the journey I traveled. You matter. So there's a great sort of rallying cry thing going on here. There's some kind of mission that you're on. Is it too much? Would you care to tell us about yourself and what is this road that you traveled? Because by simply stating it in that way, it was a difficult road. Do I read difficulty into your voyage?
Absolutely no. I was more of an adventure. I think I was something I would perhaps call a dreamy girl. A girl who, despite the situation she found herself in, or, like the normal nomadic setting, how we, my community is set up, despite that, I found refuge in books. I found a world of possibilities in book from a very young age. And so when I say the girls traveling the journey I traveled, what I mean is despite the hurdles that may perhaps, or not, despite the not so glamorous journey children in towns and cities have, the very many books, the libraries, perhaps, like all these facilities that are not found in the nomad's land, you can still find a world of possibilities in books. So my message was just that to the young girls.
I would like to suggest, should I hit you with some stereotypes? And
Sure.
Stereotypes, you have to forgive me, the stereotypes that I have. In my youth, where you come from was described as the NFD. It was the northern frontier district. It was a no-go area. It was harsh. It was full of desert. And most of all, if you're in a nomadic culture, people are moving from place to place. Now, either you grew up in some city like Nairobi, like Kisumu, like Nairobi, and it didn't apply to you. But it seems to me that young children where you are have difficulties going to school in the first place. School is, how can it be static when people are moving?
Yes, it's a bit of a challenge, and that's why even if we go back to the dedication, I said for the children who travel kilometers to quench their thirst for education, which is their truth. We have children who go as far as I think even 4, 5, or even 7 kilometers. Especially the typical nomad who wake up, pack up, have to move. Sometimes even they go like a whole term or even a whole year without attending school. But even within the nomadic settings, there are towns, there are perhaps I would call semi-urban villages, which have existing schools that are functional all year round.
And I also know that you have, from reading about you, that part of this crusade is that you actually run an entity, an NGO, which is there to establish literacy in your region. Could you go beyond a sort of Google post and tell me more?
Yes, I run an organization, a trust actually. It's called Northern Voice Trust. I formed it in 2018. We've been operating, I think this is our 3rd year now. The main aim actually is just simple, to create a community of readers. Our community are not people who are we're more of an oral tradition community. We tell our stories through oral way. All our lives have been oral. All our existing knowledge is passed through, like oral storytelling. But times have changed. Modernity has set in, whether it's forcing itself on us or whether it's inevitable. So I thought, why not have, why not create a community of readers who hopefully in the long run will create a community of writers and write these stories so that they'll be there for generation, 50 years to come. A child will be able to walk into a library and perhaps find a whole section of stories on my community. That's
yes.
Our end goal.
Okay. Yeah. I would go, Sahara, and ask you further about your views as a writer on this whole question of language. When you beg that your children might read, are they reading in Somali or are they reading in English? Which is the go-to language which you want to instill in the 8-year-old?
Of course, they read in English. English is the learning language in all schools across Kenya, I think. As a writer, I champion for mother tongue language. If you noticed, even in my book, I have a few Somali words thrown in because I really want to create a child who is grounded in what I call perhaps their ways of life, who knows their identity. Not to feel any superiority or any kind of, the whole purpose as to why I champion for mother tongue language is just to create children who are able to reflect back on their histories and their past and know who they are and are able to perhaps even write in their language. I mean,
but there's a trick question in there that I want to put in, is the idea when you start off, if you're in a quote-unquote faraway part of Kenya, who are the teachers on the ground who are going to mother tongue? Okay, we're in, I can speak my language, but who is going to be the expert who's going to take it upon themselves to teach English in your community? Are you relying on teachers who are coming from elsewhere? Are these teachers homegrown? I don't know the answer to that question. It's a genuine one.
The teachers are mostly non-locals, ironically. There are no homegrown teachers. That's not to mean that there are no Somali native speaking language teachers on the ground, but the ratio is so little. So these children are, they use, like English in their daily lives. They go to school to learn English and to perhaps even further their knowledge in the language. But while I may choose to write in English, my cause and my champion is to make sure that I also don't trickle down my language and don't sit and watch it get washed away.
Sahara, I'm going to read you some of your own words, and by extension to our audience out there. Okay. Here is your children's book. Children's books, I'm going to ask you about craft in a minute, okay, because in its entirety, it is 13 pages. Yeah. So it's not War and Peace, it's not Crime and Punishment, it's not running to 600 pages, but you have a huge responsibility to set up the future reading public. Mm. One Saturday evening, Arawelo, together with her two friends, Ilwad and Genyo, were sitting under an acacia tree outside their compound. They were playing their favorite game of ai. The tree not only provided them with a shade from the scorching sun, but it was also here that they shared secrets and stories too. The stories they would share were the ones told to them by their mothers and grandmothers. Storytelling was a skill you learn at a tender age in her community. It was their identity. Arawelo had already mastered the art of storytelling like Ayeyo, who was known in their village as the best storyteller. The storyteller that they all admire in the village is addressing them orally. When you write your books, do you want me to read it to my child, or do you want my child to read it for him or herself?
I would want the child to read the story, at the same time to be read to and to enjoy listening to the story, because I tend to think this an important aspect I hold to both of whether it's listening or reading. When a child reads a story, they're able to, reflect back on it. It's able to be ingrained into their memory, and they're able to learn perhaps vocabularies, because these are school-going children, and the idea is to build their language and to enrich their vocabulary. I also wish that the parent and the family could sit together and perhaps read my story to the children so that the children can read. For me, it's like bringing storytelling back into our lives. Because like I said, we are oral community. We used to, sit by the fireside growing up and have our grandmothers tell us stories. And it's a tradition that has been slowly eroded by time and modernity and, dwelling in cities. And I wish that through writing these stories that the family can be able to, at the end of the day, after work, perhaps get 20, 30 minutes to spare and read stories to their kids so that it bonds them and brings back storytelling moments.
Well, I seem to remember I was a daddy of small children once, they're grown men, and I seem to remember that my children would listen to stories being read to them so often that they would actually memorize the story as you read it and look at the page and tell the story from memory as if they could read, but they couldn't read. The story had been so embedded that they felt they knew the story of how, the donkey went and found water in the well. But in your story, you've put in words like identity. Now that's a very abstract concept. The kind of storytelling that I was giving were words that were already within their environment. So I'm going to ask a bit more about your craft. In preparing to write for children, are you writing for yourself in a sort of subliminal way and hoping they'll catch it? Do you presume that an 8-year-old knows what identity is? You use that word, their identity. Now, what's an 8-year-old to make of that? can you just sort of sit there and guess what identity is? Because kids are meant to infer meaning from the context and all of that.
Yeah.
So I'm accusing you of using over big words.
For writing for kids.
Mm.
Like I said, the idea is also to enrich and build the vocabulary of these children. Also, kids are curious. I think that's one thing that we should establish. They're always eager to learn new words and knowledge.
So progressively they'll find out.
Yes.
So there's a question mark somewhere which you've built in, and one day they will find out what all these things mean.
Yes.
Right. So progressing from that answer, I seem to think that you have a responsibility as a writer. I would suggest that if you're from a very metropolitan environment, that the kid who's in Nairobi or Mombasa or Kisumu is likely to be far more exposed to words and their usage. There's TV, possibly. Are you aware that when you represent your children from where you come from, that they are in some way lagging from the rest of the country? So I want you to be a bit of a politician now. Do you think that our educational system is providing a uniform starting ground for kids?
Absolutely.
The 8-year-old in Mandera is the same as the 8-year-old in Kisumu.
Absolutely no. There's a huge disparity.
And how would you go about bridging that? Is this a problem that will remain insoluble for the rest of our living days as Kenyans? How do you bridge that gap?
I wish I were a politician or a policymaker who had the power to make those policies. But since I'm not, at an individual level and as a writer, it's how I came about my initiative, which I had said it's Northern Voice Trust, which is creating a community of readers. I work with schools, and also I depend on well-wishers and donors to donate books that we take to those schools. And we have a project called Project I Read, which is simply just to sit with a child, read aloud with them, and introduce books to them. And through this reading, which is reading storybooks outside text work, outside academic books, I hope to bridge the gap, unless to equalize these two children and perhaps bring the disparity to an end.
Right. I'm going to read some more. Let me go to page 6 of A Boy Named Salah. Salah is our hero. One evening, as he was walking home from school, he heard a moan from someone across the road. Salah ran to see what was happening. He found a man lying on the ground, holding his leg and waving his hand for help. Salah asked him what was wrong, but the man couldn't speak. He just pointed at his leg. Salah searched through his school bag for anything to help him, and luckily found Malmal. He immediately put the Malmal in a bottle of water he had and mixed them, then poured it on the part of the leg that was bleeding. This gave the man a relief. Salah then ran home and came back with his father, Roble, and his friends, who helped the man get to their grandfather. His grandfather treated him and requested him to rest for the night at their home. He survived a snake bite. What is Malmal?
Malmal is a herb that has many uses. It's It's used as a painkiller, pain reliever, as antibacterial. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a trick question, my best friend, because I don't know what Malmal is. And I'm reading your book, I've just purchased it. So, where do you come in with the debate where words that are alien have to be explained to the reader? Does the reader have to work out, we had ugali na sukuma wiki, we had chapati na wali. Okay, what are these walis and sukuma wikis and ugalis? Is that something that has exercised your mind as a writer? How much is to be inferred and how much has to be explained?
Of course it did.
Because I've worked out that Malmal was some kind of curative, maybe I want some myself, to cure something or other that I have, but
I left it open so that the reader can go out of their way to find the knowledge. Of course, it's available online. I mean, in the digital world we live in, just a click on Google and you will see a picture of Malmal and perhaps even an explanation in English. So I thought I should not spoil the party for the reader, and that was my strategy to also teach non-Somali native a bit of my culture.
Right.
Yes.
A sensitive area with terms of responsibility. When I read your two books, from my understanding of the English language, I pinpointed areas where you were let down either by yourself, or by your publisher, or by your editor, or by all three. Now, I won't name and shame or read that particular subject, but we Kenyans, being specific, have problems. When do we say begun, began, begin? When do we say sung, sang, sing? Was the song sung? Was the song sang? Was it the song? So this is a problem, but there's a solution. But if between you and your editor and your publisher, you introduce a demonstrable mistake, are you creating a new form of Somali English? And that's what every Somali kid in Mandera is going to say henceforth, till death do us part?
Absolutely no. I think that will be a huge responsibility to create Somali English. I wouldn't, or maybe yes, why not? It will be a way to do away with how we always say colonial language and go back to, like our own existing languages. But yes, to answer your question, these are books read by children who are in school, who learn the craft of even writing perhaps at some point in their schooling journey. I think there should be thorough editing, there should be quality work, there should be absolutely perhaps no room for any error whatsoever. And that's why there's a series of people involved before the book gets to the consumer, who is the reader. Somebody has to take responsibility, and the buck stops with the writer, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, let's go about personal experience.
Yes.
I have written the odd thing myself, and my great reproach to my editors is that they went into print with their version of what my story ought to be, but they didn't have a sign-off from me. So as a reading culture, if you're creating and somebody else out there wants to change your intention or your presentation, what happened to you? Were you the last to see your manuscript before it became a book?
Experience has given me an idea of, there was the traditional way of publishing where the buck stopped with the publisher. It's the publisher who had authority over what gets to the consumer. And then we have this new generation, this new young writers who decided to take things in their own hands, and there the world of self-publishing was born. So the clash is, like I said, the buck stops with me because in my case, I self-published. So I have to take credit. Yes, the book went through the hands of, like an editor, and before it gets to the consumer, of course, it has to come back to me, and I have to approve that, yes, indeed, A and B are what I want to get out. And then again, that comes with the challenges of, how sustainable is self-publishing? Are we equipped enough in terms of material, in terms of perhaps even cost? Because publishing is not, it's not easy. It needs a lot of, resources. So do you have enough resources to sustain self-publishing? I think that's the clash.
Right. Well, I mean, we're only discussing the problems that we're addressing with you,
Yeah.
the problems that we've addressed in this forum
Yeah.
with other writers. I would perhaps engage you on the idea of choosing a title. So you've gone for two. Again, it's the idea of who bears the responsibility. Arawelo is the name, a girl's name.
Yes.
But if I were to substitute that name and the title was, let us say, a Christian name, and it was Mary, or you see where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
would that in itself entice me as a mum or dad going through a bookshop to buy that particular book? Particularly as you know that here in Kenya, you're normally not allowed to flip through the book to make a choice. It's sort of like packaged and, plastic and clipped on either side so that you either pay or don't pay. What led you to choose a title like that?
Yes, I'm a parent, and it will entice me. I mean, if I walked into a bookshop and I saw a book written Atieno, or maybe like Asumbi, I'll be interested. I'll be like, oh, what about Atieno?
You think that the name is in itself is an enticement?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
To my curious mind, perhaps it will
Yeah.
entice me.
Right.
But to answer the question as to why the choice of title and why Arawelo in particular, Arawelo was a legendary figure, actually a queen, not just a legendary figure, in the Somali folklore stories in the 15th century. And she was a woman who championed for women's rights at that time and empowered a lot of ladies. So she had all this strong character, leadership, and as you read, the book is all female character. So perhaps my message that I'm trying to pass on is just to inspire these girls to be strong, to take into leadership roles, to see themselves and see Arawelo in themselves.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to pass from that one to Salah, a boy named Salah. Okay, there am I, looking for a book to read. Now defend that title for me.
Again, also Abain and Salah was a story inspired by a teacher in Mandara who unfortunately lost his life fighting terrorists on a bus. I think it's a story perhaps known to...
Oh, this is, we remember the bus which was ambushed with any number of people and lots of people were killed.
Yes, and this particular teacher died defending the life of a non-local person.
Right.
They attacked the bus, and then they were using religion, of course, to segregate people.
Right, so they'd ask you a question to prove whether you were Muslim or not.
Exactly.
Like, who was the Prophet's wife? You get it wrong, you're dead. Yes, it's all
and so
quite
Teacher Salah
extreme.
stood up to those people, that we'll call them bullies.
Right.
And he questioned them, like, who are you to ask people such questions? Who are you to even kill?
So Mbuli is like an infidel, non-believer, destined for oblivion kind of person.
Perhaps.
Yeah, okay, right.
So he questioned, he fought them back, and unfortunately he lost his life in the event.
Right.
And so I've...
But Sahara, I'm still asking, you have knowledge that is your knowledge, and you're not disseminating it to the widest possible community. There are things that you know, and you say, these pertain to my people, to our culture. We all know who, I don't know, Luanda Magere was. We know where Gotalila was. but the rest of us don't. So what are you doing? What homework are you doing to make us appreciate the, well, you could have told the story of the teacher who lost his life. Maybe 8-year-olds shouldn't hear that kind of story, so I'll correct myself. But I'm still accusing you of insufficient exposure to your culture for those who don't know it.
For this particular story, actually the story is not even on teacher Salah. He just inspired the character named Salah.
Right, and then you put him in your title.
I put him in my title, yes. But, okay, I think it's a sensitive case. I wouldn't really want to take it head on. And especially when dealing with children, I felt that they should just live with the character and, the humane side of him, the kind act he did. And that was my message to the children.
Right. Okay. I think we have enough time to go on to another prong, which is slightly more personal, but personal to you as a writer, not as an individual. What have you done to qualify you to call yourself a children's writer in a way that 47,122,000 Kenyans might not? In other words, what is your study? What is your preparation? Did you just get up one day and said, oh gosh, I want to disseminate my culture. It's not enough of it going around. I'm going to write a book and I'm going to find somebody to publish it. I hope, in a way, that that's not the answer you're going to give.
And interestingly, that is the answer. I laughed because I was just like, yes, I just woke up one day and thought that, I've always had some little creativity in me. And I was like, yes, I think I could sit down and write for kids. Anyway,
I'm going to cut you short because we go back to this notion of responsibility. What is you're growing as a writer, you're young. What homework preparation did you get into the whole idea of vocabulary range? Because if you talk about the competency-based curriculum, any parent in that group will tell you that their kid in standard 2, they're meant to operate these 500 words. And if you've ever tried submitting to editors who write for children, I've had it like, oh, sorry, Mr. Sibi-Okumu, we can't have that word in this because it's only for standard 3. So where do you come in on that? My argument, as you said earlier, is that the inquisitive child can take on much more than we give them credit for. So,
in other words,
your preparation to be, did you do a PhD in child psychology, or where's it all coming from?
I did not do any PhD in child psychology, and I actually come from a different field altogether. My study is in development studies. But what inspired me to write for kids, and where I get the craft, I will say perhaps, I have a child whom you'll allow me to just give a little story.
Do.
To bring my point home. So one day we were doing book shopping and in some bookstore in Nairobi, and we go to the children's section and I try to find a book for her, and all I see is, books, I don't know, something like Christmas, something like Snow, something Mary, Tom, Kamau. And so I was like, okay, this is the exact same environment I grew up in. As a child, I could not find books that I would walk into a bookstore and see, oh, this is a book I can read because I relate with it, either by a picture on it or a title on it. I kind of challenged myself to produce literature that, like a child who looks like me will walk into a bookstore and find. As to whether I have done my, homework, yes, before I write, I try to put myself into the mind of a child, as if I am telling a story to my child or any child of her age. And I really hate to use the word that I have to get down to the level of a child, because I always think kids are even more really curious and inquisitive more than adults are. We're all bombarded with, the busyness of life, while a child is not. Their brain is young and fresh and wants to be filled in with a lot of ideas.
Time is not on our side now,
okay.
so two quick questions on that.
All right.
The idea of a culture, I just want you to comment on this whole idea of belief, spirituality, religion, what you will. Do you feel that you're writing and trying to pass on as part of your cultural message? Are they secular in nature, or are they apologies for your Muslim faith?
Absolutely no apologies. And I will honestly want to kind of distance myself away from any spirituality or any kind of doctrine or religion or belief. But I put on more of a cultural heart, more of, like...
Yeah, but that self-same child might be reading your book, but going from the madrasa, if I understand the culture properly.
Yes, yeah.
So that already there is a message. If you go against the grain of that, then you're going to annoy your target initial readership. Has this ever been a problem or not?
Yeah, absolutely, it is a problem. And as a writer, you really have to, like, be edgy about it and just, yeah.
Okay. And
you have to certainly choose your choice of words.
Yeah, we have three stock questions that we ask every writer, but before we get to them, here we are. I don't know whether the camera can pitch it. We have all these lovely illustrations. We know exactly how to comment a bit on who illustrated your book and the choice of that, because it's crucial to the whole mix. Because it's a visual story, when they say they were playing I, the kid wants to see, oh, there they are, there's a little hole there. Yeah, who did that? And is that, again, publisher, editor, or did you draw the pictures? What happened?
I didn't draw the pictures. It was a publisher, editor kind of work. But I came up with the concept of the illustration, that Arawelo has to look like this, that the whole has to look like this, in other words, I just gave the lead narrations to the illustrator.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. These are the three foundation questions for everybody. We've got 3 minutes in which to answer them. Right. What do you read, Sahara Abdi?
I read, I will say, anything and everything readable.
Okay.
Be it books, textbooks, magazines, newspapers.
Biography, autobiography, fiction.
More of history,
poetry.
Autobiography,
Yeah, okay.
Yes, poetry, especially from our own background, from my own community.
You're right.
Yes.
Okay. When in your 24-hour day do you read?
Mornings and at night before I get to bed, I always read, almost every day. Yes.
Right. And the last one is a bit unfair because you've sort of answered it up before now. Why do you write?
I write because I feel like it's a responsibility to myself, to my child, to my community, and to my creator. It's a service for me.
Sorry?
It's an act of service for me.
It's an act of service.
Yes.
For you, it's an act of service
Yes.
to the community. And on that very inspiring note, we shall stand up and thank our audience for being so kind. From the Multimedia Library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi, this is Mbogi, MaWriters. Thank you. And we'll second time.